She found a rusted key in her father's toolbox. It opened a cellar no one knew existed. What she discovered down there wouldn't just save her home. It would rewrite the story of the man who raised her. If you believe that our past holds secrets we need to unlock, then stick with me and subscribe for more stories like this one. What I found was a legacy of sacrifice, hidden in plain sight. It started on the third Tuesday after the funeral, the day the world decided I was officially out of time. The air in my father's workshop was thick with the ghosts of old projects. It smelled of sawdust, oil, and the cold, metallic scent of grief. I was 18 years and 22 days old, an adult by the letter of the law, which meant I was now solely responsible for the dismantling of a life. 2 years of his slow decline, of hospital corridors that smelled of bleach and quiet desperation, had been reduced to a stack of cardboard boxes and a roll of packing tape that kept losing its edge. Every object felt heavier than it should. His favorite claw hammer, the handle worn smooth and dark with the oil from his hands. A jar of mismatched screws he always swore he'd sort one day. The silence was the worst part. For my entire life, this garage had been a place of noise. The whine of the table saw, the rhythmic rasp of a hand plane, the low hum of the radio tuned to the classic rock station he loved. Now the only sound was the scrape of a box on the concrete floor and the frantic, useless beat of my own heart. The house was being taken. That was the cold, hard fact, Mr. Davies. The lawyer who seemed to be made of dusty files and quiet pity had delivered over the phone an hour ago. "Foreclosure proceedings will begin on the 1st of the month, Maya," he'd said, his voice gentle but firm, the way you talk to a child or a stray dog. "There's a lien on the property, an old debt of your father's. I'm very sorry." An old debt. It felt like a line from a black and white movie, not something that could snatch away the only home I'd ever known. Dad was a mechanic who fixed neighbors' lawnmowers and a woodworker who made beautiful, simple furniture that he usually just gave away. He was quiet, kind, and meticulous. He wasn't the kind of man who had old debts. But the papers were real. The threat was real. And I had 2 weeks to either produce a sum of money that might as well have been $1 million or pack up 17 years of my life and walk away. So I packed. I started in the workshop because it was the place that felt most like him, and I thought if I could get through this room, I could get through anything. I was working on his main workbench, a massive slab of maple he'd built himself, clearing the surface of tools and half-finished projects. There was a small birdhouse, its joints perfectly dovetailed, waiting for a roof. The sight of it made my throat ache. He was going to teach me how to do that. There was always going to be more time. Under the bench was his primary toolbox, a heavy, red metal cantilever case that took 2 hands to haul out. It was rusted at the corners and splattered with paint and something that looked suspiciously like old blood from a long ago busted knuckle. I opened the squealing clasps. The top trays unfolded with a familiar metallic sigh, revealing rows of wrenches and sockets, each in its designated clip. Dad's obsession with order was legendary. A place for everything and everything in its place. It was his mantra. It was how he made sense of the world. I lifted the top tray out, then the second. My plan was to dump the smaller tools into a bucket and sell the big box. It was worth something, and right now, every dollar was a step further away from sleeping in my car. The bottom of the box was lined with a thin, oil-stained piece of foam. As I started to peel it back, my fingers caught on something. A seam. The foam wasn't one solid piece. It was cut around the edges. It was a cover. My breath caught. I worked my fingernails under the edge and lifted. Beneath it was not the painted metal bottom of the toolbox, but another, thinner sheet of metal. A false bottom. It had a small, folded-over tab at one end. I pulled it, and the plate lifted out. And there, nestled in a shallow, hidden compartment, was a single object. It was a key. Not a modern house key or a car key. This was old, made of dark, pitted iron. It was ornate in a simple way, with a round, solid bow and a complex, toothed bit. A thick layer of rust coated its surface, turning my fingertips reddish-brown. It felt cold and ancient, like something you'd find at the bottom of a well. It didn't belong here. It didn't belong to my father, the man of simple tools and simple tastes. I held it in my palm, the weight of it a solid, pressing question. Where did it come from? And what in the world did it open? The key was an anomaly, a piece of a puzzle I didn't know existed. My father's life, as I knew it, had no room for rusted, secret keys. His world was one of visible things, of tangible problems that could be solved with the right tool and a bit of patience. A sputtering engine, a wobbly chair leg, a leaky faucet. He taught me to see the mechanics of the world, to understand how things fit together. But this key didn't fit. I closed my hand around it, the cold iron seeping into my skin. The call from Mr. Davies echoed in my head. An old debt. A lien. Words that felt alien and aggressive. My father had been a man who paid his bills on time, who wrote down every expense in a small, worn ledger he kept in his desk. He hated owing anyone anything. The idea that he'd left behind a debt large enough to swallow our home felt like a betrayal, not of me, but of his own character. It didn't make sense. None of it did. I stood there in the silent workshop, the key a heavy secret in my fist. It had to open something in this house. It was the only explanation. Dad was not a man for sentimentality about far-flung places. If he kept this key, hidden so carefully, its lock had to be closed. My first thought was the old chest in the attic. It was my grandmother's, a huge, dome-top trunk bound in leather and brass that Dad had never, ever opened. He said her things were in there, and he wasn't ready to look through them. It seemed plausible. I left the chaos of the workshop and climbed the pull-down stairs to the attic, the key now looped on a piece of twine around my neck, bumping against my collarbone like a second, metallic heartbeat. The attic was a museum of our family's quiet life. Boxes of my old school projects, holiday decorations, my mother's clothes sealed in vacuum bags. She'd passed when I was 5, a hazy, smiling memory, and a collection of objects he couldn't bear to part with. The air was still and smelled of dry wood and mothballs. In the far corner, under the slope of the roof, sat the trunk. It was as imposing as I remembered, a sleeping dragon of a thing. Its lock was large and made of brass, tarnished with age. But it was a simple lock, and the keyhole was a straightforward slit. My ornate, toothed key wouldn't even begin to fit. Disappointment was a sharp, bitter taste in my mouth. I tried it anyway, jiggling the key against the brass plate, but it was useless. Not the trunk. I spent the next hour on a frantic, increasingly desperate treasure hunt. I tried the key on the old roll-top desk in the study, on a locked file cabinet I'd never paid attention to before, on the small cast-iron door of the fireplace's ash cleanout. I even took it outside, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway, and tried it on the padlocks of the dilapidated shed at the back of the property. Nothing. Every attempt was a fresh wave of failure. The key remained a stubborn, silent enigma. The sun began to dip lower, casting long, distorted shadows across the yard. The house, which had always been my sanctuary, was starting to feel like a house of strangers. Every corner I'd thought I knew now seemed to hold a potential secret, a hidden door, a life my father had lived in the margins of the one I saw. I was running out of places to look. I ended up back where I started, in the workshop, standing over the open toolbox. The false bottom stared up at me, an empty hollow. I had been so sure. Why hide a key in the workshop if it wasn't for something nearby? I sank onto the wooden stool, my head in my hands. The pressure of the foreclosure, the grief, the confusion, it was all a heavy blanket, smothering me. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. It was all just too much. I looked around the room, my gaze sweeping over the familiar clutter, but now I was looking for something different. Not for a lock, but for an absence. A seam. A line that shouldn't be there. A place for everything, and everything in its place. That was his rule. I scanned the pegboards, the shelves, the stacks of lumber. Everything was orderly, even in its state of partial packing. My eyes drifted down to the floor. It was concrete, cracked and stained, like any garage floor. But in the back corner, behind the hulking form of the table saw, there was something. A difference in the texture. I had to push the saw out of the way, its iron wheels groaning in protest as I shoved its immense weight aside. And there it was. A perfectly square outline etched into the concrete, about 3 feet by 3 feet. It was faint, filled in with years of dust and grime, but it was undeniably there. In the center of the square was a small, recessed iron ring lying flush with the floor. It was a trap door. I had lived in this house for 17 years. I had spent hundreds of hours in this workshop, and I had never, ever seen it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knelt down, my jeans scraping against the rough concrete, and hooked my fingers under the iron ring. It was stiff, sealed with grime. I pulled, grunting with the effort, and at first, nothing happened. I repositioned my feet, got a better grip, and heaved with all my strength. With a grating shriek of metal on stone, the door lifted a few inches. A wave of air washed over my face. It was cold, deeply cold, and it smelled of damp earth, of stone, and of something else. Something that smelled like time itself. I propped the heavy concrete and metal door open. It rested back with a solid thud. Below was a dark, square hole, and a simple wooden ladder descending into blackness. I took the key from around my neck. My hand was shaking now, but not from fear. It was from a terrifying, electric certainty. I knew, with a conviction that settled deep in my bones, that I was about to find the lock. I was leaving the world I knew, and climbing down into the one my father had kept hidden. The descent was short, maybe 10 or 12 feet. The wooden rungs of the ladder were sturdy, and my sneakers found them easily in the dark. The cold intensified with every step, seeping through my jeans and sweatshirt. It was a profound, cellar cold that felt ancient and undisturbed. When my feet touched the floor, it was solid stone. I stood in absolute blackness for a moment, my eyes struggling to adjust. The only light was the pale gray square of the opening above me. The air was still and heavy, and so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with cold, and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut a sharp, white cone through the darkness, and I finally saw where I was. It wasn't a cellar, not really. It was a room. Small, no bigger than a walk-in closet, and lined on all 4 sides with neatly laid field stone. The ceiling was low, just a few inches above my head, with thick wooden beams running across. There was no dirt, no sign of pests. It was clean, meticulously so. It looked less like a forgotten cellar and more like a vault. There was almost nothing in it. Against the far wall, there was a simple, rough-hewn wooden shelf, and on that shelf sat a single object. It was a metal box, like a military-grade ammunition can, painted a dull olive green. It had a heavy-duty latch on the front, and next to the latch was a thick, circular lock. The lock was dark, made of the same pitted iron as the key. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the small space. The beam of my phone's light trembled in my hand. This was it. The air was so cold I could see my breath, a small, white cloud in the flashlight's beam. I reached the shelf and looked at the lock. The keyhole was not a simple slit. It was a complex, star-like shape. The same shape as the bit on the rusted key. My whole body felt like a live wire. With a hand that I had to consciously steady, I lifted the key. It slid into the lock with a smooth, perfect precision, as if it had been waiting for this moment for decades. There was no resistance, no grinding of old metal. It just fit. I took a deep breath, held it, and turned the key. There was a loud, satisfying series of clicks from inside the lock's mechanism. A sound of release. The latch sprang open. For a long moment, I just stood there, my hand still on the key. Whatever was in this box was the heart of the secret. It was the reason for the false-bottomed toolbox, for the hidden key, for this secret room buried beneath our lives. It was the answer to the question of the debt. It was the story of my father I had never been told. Part of me didn't want to open it. Part of me wanted to turn around, climb the ladder, close the trapdoor, and pretend none of this had ever happened. I could just walk away from the house, the debt, and whatever terrible truth was waiting for me in this cold, dark place. But I couldn't. I had to know. I pulled the key out, my fingers numb, and lifted the heavy lid of the metal box. The beam from my phone illuminated the contents. It wasn't what I expected. There was no treasure, no weapons, no stacks of cash. Instead, there was just a single, thick, manila envelope sealed with a wax stamp. The stamp was a simple letter L. For Leo. My father's name. My name, Maya, was written on the front of the envelope in his familiar, neat, slightly slanted handwriting. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. The box also contained a few other items, tucked neatly to one side. A stack of old, crisp bearer bonds that looked like they were from the 1980s, their value printed in stark, official-looking numbers. A small, velvet pouch that was heavy for its size. And a passport, its cover a faded blue, with a name on it I didn't recognize. But my focus was on the envelope. It was addressed to me and me alone. This was his final word, his explanation. This was the truth. I sat down on the cold stone floor, the box in my lap, and with a shaky finger, I broke the wax seal. The paper inside was thick and heavy. I unfolded the pages, my breath catching in my throat. The same neat handwriting covered page after page. It began with 2 words that shattered my heart. My dearest Maya, it read. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have found your way here. I am sorry. I am so sorry for all of it. The letter was his confession. It was the story of a man I never knew, a life lived in fear and quiet atonement. My father, Leo, had not always been a simple mechanic. In his early 20s, long before I was born, he was a different person in a different city. He had been a driver, not for a taxi service or a delivery company. He was a wheelman, the best in a city that valued quick and quiet exits. He wrote about the thrill of it, the cold knot of fear and adrenaline that he mistook for being alive. He wasn't a bad person, he insisted on the page. He was just young and broke and desperate to build a life for my mother, who he'd just met. He fell in with a crew run by a man named Julian Croft. They were thieves, but they had a code. They stole from corporations, from insurance companies, from the kind of people who wouldn't miss the money. It was a justification, a lie he told himself so he could sleep at night. They planned one last job, a big one, a payroll heist from a shipping company. It was supposed to be their retirement score. Enough for him and my mom to disappear and start over, to buy a little house somewhere quiet and live a normal life. The job went perfectly, too perfectly. They got away clean with over $2 million in cash. They were supposed to lay low for a month, then meet to divide the score. But Julian Croft had other plans. He took all the money and disappeared, leaving the rest of the crew holding the bag. One of them got caught, and under pressure, he gave up names, including my father's. But Croft had been clever. He didn't just steal the money, he framed my father for it. He created a paper trail, a series of debts and transactions that made it look like Leo had masterminded the whole thing and was now on the run. The police issued a warrant. The people they stole from, a powerful and not entirely legal shipping conglomerate, put a private bounty on his head. My father was a marked man. He and my mother ran. They changed their names, moved across the country, and ended up in this small, sleepy town. He used his share of a much smaller, earlier job, the bearer bonds and the pouch of gold coins I now saw in the box, to buy our house in cash, under his new name. He built this hidden room himself, in the dead of night, before the concrete of the workshop floor was even fully cured. It was his panic room, his final fallback. He became Leo, the quiet mechanic. He buried his past so deep, he almost believed it was gone. But Julian Croft wasn't the kind of man to let things go. Years later, he resurfaced, not as a thief, but as a legitimate businessman. He'd laundered the stolen money and built an empire. And he'd found my father. He didn't want him arrested. He wanted to control him. Croft had leveraged the old, fabricated debt, the one that made my father look like the mastermind. He held it over him like a guillotine. The lien on our house wasn't from a bank. It was from a shell corporation owned by Croft. It was his leash. For years, my father had been paying him, small amounts here and there, just enough to keep him at bay, to keep him from exposing the truth and destroying the quiet life he had built for me. That was the old debt. It was blackmail, pure and simple. His slow decline, the 2 years I thought he was just getting old and sick, it wasn't just illness. It was the stress, the fear. The weight of it had finally broken him. He knew he was dying, and he knew that as soon as he was gone, Croft would come for the house. It was the last piece of leverage he had. He doesn't want the money, Maya, my father wrote. He wants to erase me. Owning this house, the one I built for you and your mother, is his final victory. It's a trophy. The pages trembled in my hand. I cried. I cried for the quiet, gentle man who fixed lawnmowers and built birdhouses, who carried this terrifying secret alone for 2 decades. I cried for the fear he must have lived with every single day. The constant looking over his shoulder, the terror that every knock on the door could be the end of everything. His quietness wasn't just his nature, it was a disguise. His simple life wasn't a choice, it was a cage he had built to keep me safe. He had given up his name, his youth, his freedom, all for me. The weight of that sacrifice was crushing. The letter ended with instructions. A choice. In this box is everything I saved from before, he wrote. The bearer bonds are clean, the gold is clean. It's enough for you to disappear, just like your mother and I did. It's enough for you to start a new life, somewhere far away from here. No one will ever find you. You can be free. This is one choice. He continued. The other choice is to stay and fight. The passport in the box belongs to a man named Thomas Fincher. He was the 4th member of our crew, the one who was betrayed by Croft and died in prison. His sister is a journalist, a very good one. Her contact information is taped to the back of the passport. If you go to her and you give her this story and the proof I've included in the hidden compartment of this box, you might be able to expose Croft for who he is. You might be able to save our home. But it is dangerous, Maya. Croft is a powerful man. He will fight back, and he will fight dirty. Fighting means you step into my world, the world I tried so desperately to keep you out of. Running means you are free of it forever. He ended the letter with a final, heartbreaking plea. Whatever you choose, know this. Every single day of my quiet life with you was worth it. You were my real treasure. You were my one perfect job. I love you, Dad. I sat there on the cold stone floor, in the circle of my phone's light, the letter in my lap, and I felt the entire world shift on its axis. The man I had spent the last 3 weeks mourning was a stranger. And yet, I had never felt closer to him. He had left me with an impossible choice, a guaranteed, safe escape, or a dangerous, uncertain fight for a home that was now soaked in the tragedy of his past. The silence in the cellar was absolute. The cold was a physical presence, wrapping around me, but I barely felt it. My mind was a storm of images and emotions. My father, young and reckless, behind the wheel of a speeding car. My mother, her face etched with fear, running with him into a new, hidden life. The quiet, gentle man I knew, his hands steady as he fixed a bicycle chain, his eyes holding a universe of secrets I never saw. Julian Croft. The name was a stain, a faceless villain who had haunted my father's life and was now reaching out from the past to ruin mine. I looked at the items in the box again. The bearer bonds, crisp and anonymous, promised a future without shadows. I could walk away. I could be on a plane by morning, heading toward a life where no one knew my name or my father's story. A clean break. The thought was intoxicating. It was a release from the grief, the pressure, the sudden, terrifying weight of his legacy. I could sell the tools, donate the furniture, and leave the key for the bank or for Croft's men to find when they came to claim their prize. It would be easy. But then I looked at the passport. Thomas Fincher, a man who died in prison because of Croft's betrayal, a man with a sister who deserved the truth. I thought about the house above me. Every floorboard, every window, every crooked nail was a testament to my father's love. He didn't just build a home, he built a fortress to keep the darkness at bay. Selling it, abandoning it to the man who destroyed him, felt like a desecration. It felt like letting Croft win, letting him erase my father completely. My father had spent 20 years in a prison of his own making to protect me. He lived a half-life so I could have a full one. Could I really honor that sacrifice by running? By taking the easy way out that he had so lovingly provided? The anger started then, a slow, hot burn in my chest that finally pushed back the cold of the cellar. It was an anger on my father's behalf, an anger for the life he should have had, an anger at this man, Croft, who had grown rich and powerful on betrayal and now wanted to claim the last thing my father had to show for his life. Have you ever been faced with a choice where the easy path felt like a betrayal and the hard path felt terrifyingly impossible? It's a moment that defines you. It's where you discover what you're really made of. For anyone watching this who has been in that place, who has had to choose between safety and what is right, I want you to know you're not alone. Share your story in the comments if you feel comfortable, because these are the moments that connect us. For me, sitting in that dark, cold room, the choice became clearer and clearer with every beat of my angry heart. My father gave me two options, but really, he only gave me one. He knew me. He knew I was his daughter. I would not run. I would not let his story end with his enemies standing on the ashes of his life. I reached back into the box, my fingers searching the sides. Just as the letter had said, there was another hidden compartment, a small panel that slid away to reveal a stack of microcassettes and a few black and white photographs. The proof. I picked up the small, worn passport. On the back, just as he'd written, was a piece of yellowed tape. On it, in my father's tiny, precise script, was a name and a phone number. Sarah Fincher. I stood up, my legs stiff from the cold stone. I put the letter, the tapes, and the passport into my jacket pocket. I left the bonds and the gold in the box. I closed the lid, turned the key in the lock, and left it on the shelf. That money was for a different life, a life I was no longer going to live. My choice was made. I was going to fight. I wasn't just going to save my home, I was going to get justice for my father. The climb back up the ladder was different. I had descended into the cellar as a grieving, lost girl. I emerged as something else. The workshop no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like an armory. The tools weren't just memories of my father. They were his legacy of building, of fixing, of making things right. And now it was my turn. I walked out of the workshop and into the house. The familiar rooms looked different, charged with a new meaning. This wasn't just a collection of wood and drywall. It was the prize in a war I had just declared. I went to the kitchen, my hands steady now, and picked up the phone. I dialed the number for Mr. Davies. He answered on the second ring, his voice tired. Maya, is everything all right? Mr. Davies, I said, and my own voice surprised me. It was clear and hard, without a trace of the wavering uncertainty he was used to. I need you to file an injunction to stop the foreclosure. Immediately. There was a pause. I could hear him sigh, a sound of gentle exasperation. Maya, we've been over this. We don't have the grounds, or the money for a legal challenge of that magnitude. We have grounds, I said, my voice low and firm. The lien on this property is fraudulent. It's the product of decades of blackmail and extortion. And I have the proof. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could almost hear the gears turning in his legal mind, shifting from pity to professional curiosity. Blackmail, he finally said, the word hanging in the air. Maya, that's a very serious allegation. I know, I said. I'm on my way to your office. I'll bring everything. The man who holds the lien is named Julian Croft. I suggest you start looking into him. I hung up before he could argue. My next call was harder. I looked at the number on the back of the passport, my thumb hovering over the digits. Sarah Fincher, a journalist, a stranger, but also the sister of a man my father had wronged, however unintentionally. She had a right to know. This was the first step into my father's world, and it was terrifying. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times, and I was about to hang up when a woman's voice answered, sharp and impatient. Fincher. Is this Sarah Fincher? I asked, my throat suddenly dry. Who's asking? My name is Maya, I said. My father was Leo. He knew your brother, Thomas. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with a history I was only just beginning to understand. It was not a friendly silence. My brother has been dead for 15 years, she said, her voice flat and cold. Whatever this is, I'm not interested. She was about to hang up. I could feel it. Julian Croft, I said quickly, the name a desperate gambit. My father left me evidence, tapes. He left them for you. Another pause, longer this time. The ice in her voice cracked, just a little. Where are you? She asked. We met 2 hours later at an all-night diner, halfway between my town and the city where she lived. It was a place of buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee. She was older than I expected, in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a weary set to her mouth. She looked like a woman who had been fighting a long, losing battle for most of her life. I told her everything. I gave her the letter to read, and I watched her face as the story unfolded, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock to a deep, resonant anger that matched my own. When she was done, she looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He was there, she whispered. Your father. He was at the trial. He sat in the back of the courtroom every single day, watching them send my brother away for a crime he didn't commit. I always wondered who he was. My father had carried that guilt for 20 years. He hadn't just run, he had borne witness. Sarah listened to the microcassettes right there in the booth, using a small, handheld recorder she'd brought with her. They were conversations my father had secretly taped between himself and Croft over the years. Phone calls where Croft would threaten him, where they would argue over the payments, where the entire sordid arrangement was laid bare. It was undeniable proof. This is it, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This is everything I've been looking for. For 20 years, I've been trying to prove Croft built his empire on stolen money and my brother's life. And this is the key. She looked at me, a new respect in her eyes. Your father was a brave man, Maya. Not in the beginning, maybe, but in the end, he was. He gave you a choice, and you chose the right one. That night, a partnership was formed. An unlikely alliance between the daughter of a thief and the sister of his victim, united against a common enemy. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, affidavits, and late-night strategy sessions with Sarah. Mr. Davies, armed with my father's evidence, was a changed man. The tired, pitying lawyer was gone, replaced by a sharp, aggressive litigator who seemed to relish the fight. He filed the injunction, and for the first time, Crofts Shell Corporation had to respond not to a grieving, helpless girl, but to a serious legal challenge. They were caught off guard. While the lawyers fought in court, Sarah began to work her own magic. She started laying the groundwork for a massive exposé, using my father's tapes as the foundation and building on it with her own 2 decades of research. She found other victims, other people Croft had betrayed or bullied into silence over the years. The story was bigger than just one heist. It was a pattern, a lifetime of cruelty and corruption. I was no longer just packing boxes. I was an active participant in the fight. I spent my days at the library, digging through old newspaper archives on microfiche, looking for articles about the original heist, about Croft's early career, anything that could help Sarah build her case. I felt a purpose I had never known. The grief for my father was still there, a constant, dull ache in my chest. But now it was mingled with pride. I was finishing his work. I was honoring his sacrifice in the only way that mattered. The house became my command center. The kitchen table was buried under legal documents and research notes. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with focus, with determination. I started to clean the workshop, not to pack it away, but to reclaim it. I swept the floors, organized the tools, and wiped the dust off the unfinished birdhouse. I decided I would learn how to finish it. One evening, a sleek, black car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and had the kind of polished, predatory smile that made my skin crawl. He didn't bother knocking. He walked right up to the porch where I was sitting. "Maya," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm Mark Renshaw. I represent Northwood Properties, the company that holds the note on this house. Northwood Properties, one of Julian Croft's flagship companies." This was him. This was the enemy, in the flesh. "I'm here to make you an offer," he said, ignoring the fact that I hadn't invited him to speak. "My client is prepared to forgive the entirety of your father's outstanding debt. He will also give you a cash settlement, a very generous one, enough to set you up for life." He named a number that made my head spin. It was more money than I could possibly imagine. "All you have to do," he continued, his smile tightening, "is drop this ridiculous lawsuit and turn over whatever it is you think you have." I looked at him, at his expensive suit and his smug, confident face. This was the easy path, gift-wrapped and delivered to my door. The escape my father had offered me, but tainted, offered by the very man who had caused all our pain. I thought about my father, living in fear for 20 years. I thought about Thomas Fincher, dying in a prison cell. I thought about Sarah, fighting for 2 decades for a truth no one would believe. I stood up. I was only 18, and he was a powerful, intimidating man. But in that moment, standing on the porch of the house my father had died to protect, I was not afraid. "This house is not for sale," I said, my voice steady. "And neither am I. Now get off my property." For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw a flash of genuine, furious surprise in his eyes. He wasn't used to being told no. He recovered quickly, his smile turning into a sneer. "You're making a mistake, little girl," he said, his voice losing its silken edge. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." He left. The black car crunched over the gravel and disappeared down the road, a shadow retreating into the dusk. I stood on the porch for a long time, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a wild, triumphant energy. The war had officially begun, and I had just fired my first real shot. The fight for the house became the fight for my father's legacy. It wasn't just about property anymore, it was about the truth. The legal battle was slow and grinding. Croft's lawyers threw up roadblock after roadblock, filing motion after motion to try and bury us in paperwork and bleed Mr. Davies dry. But my father's evidence was a rock they couldn't get around. The tapes were undeniable. And Mr. Davies, revitalized by a righteous cause, was relentless. While the lawyers duked it out, Sarah Fincher's story finally broke. It landed on the front page of a major national newspaper, a sprawling, meticulously documented exposé of Julian Croft's entire career, from the payroll heist that started it all to his current empire built on fraud and intimidation. My father's story, and my own, were a central part of it, protected by anonymity but presented with damning clarity. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Croft. The article triggered federal investigations. The SEC froze his assets. Former business partners, smelling blood in the water, turned on him. His carefully constructed world began to crumble, piece by piece. The lien on our house, once a guillotine, was now just another piece of evidence in the mountain of charges against him. A few weeks after the story was published, Mr. Davies called me. "It's over, Maya," he said, and for the first time I could hear him smiling over the phone. "They're dropping the suit. The lien is gone. The house is yours, free and clear." I hung up the phone and slid down to the floor, the relief so overwhelming it felt like a physical blow. I had won. We had won. I sat there, in the middle of the kitchen, and cried. But this time, they were not tears of grief or anger. They were tears of release. I cried for the end of the fear, for the lifting of the shadow that had hung over our family for my entire life. That evening, I went back down into the cellar. It didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a monument. A quiet, hidden place of sacrifice. I took the bearer bonds and the pouch of gold coins out of the metal box. The next day, I took them to Mr. Davies. "I want to set up a foundation," I told him, "in Thomas Fincher's name, for wrongly convicted people, to help them get the legal aid they never had." It was the right thing to do. It was what my father, in the end, would have wanted. The money from his past would be used to fix the kind of injustice that had created it. It was a way of closing the circle. Life settled into a new kind of normal. The house was quiet again, but it was a peaceful quiet. I started taking community college classes, studying woodworking and business management. I finished the birdhouse my father had started, my hands slowly learning the familiar language of the wood. It wasn't perfect, my joints weren't as seamless as his. But it was sturdy, and it was mine. I put it on a post in the backyard, and a few days later, a family of wrens moved in. Sometimes, I would sit on the porch in the evening, watching the sun go down, and I would think about him. I no longer just saw the quiet mechanic, I saw the whole man. The reckless youth, the terrified fugitive, the fiercely protective father. The man who carried a secret that broke his heart and his body, all to give me a chance at a normal life. I understood now that a home isn't just a place. It's a story. It's a legacy. It's the choices that are made within its walls. My father had left me more than a house. He had left me a choice. He had trusted me to understand his complicated, messy, beautiful love. He had trusted me to know the difference between running away and coming home. This house was my home. I had fought for it. I had earned it. And I was going to live a life here that would make him proud. A life of purpose, of honesty, and of peace. The very things he had wanted for himself, but had sacrificed for me. The past never really leaves us. It's written into the floorboards of our homes and the chambers of our hearts. But we get to choose what to do with it. We can let it be a prison, or we can use its secrets to build a better future. That's the lesson my father's rusted key taught me. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to uncover a family secret or fight for what you believe in, I hope you'll subscribe and join our community. Your story matters. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What does home mean to you? What legacies are you fighting for? I'll be reading every one. Thank you for listening.